It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. Today, I feel like first talking about how much I struggle to put my voice out for someone to listen. I suppose it starts with how much I don't like hearing my own recorded voice, because when I'm talking, it sounds fine. And then for the longest time, I told myself a variety of these things. Everyone hates the sound of their voice. If I practice listening to my voice, it'll get better. What if I'm making this a bigger deal than it actually is? Get over this dumb first world problem, Ronsley. You've made this all up. So here's the deal. This is the psychology of entrepreneurship. So I can say some of the stuff here. The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh. Oh, wait. We've heard that line before. So while my mind made up all these lovely lines to keep me distracted, I realized that this was deeper. This was about me not liking myself, my voice, my body, my thoughts, my fill in the blank. And today that changes. I'm making a vow to myself publicly to do whatever it takes to love myself, even if right now I intellectually might not know exactly what that means. However, I intend to work every day to find that out. Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It by Kamal Ravikant. It was recommended to me by a longtime listener of this show and serial entrepreneur and mother, Trivinia Barber. For all you listening, I recommend you take 4 hours out of your life and consume that book. Anyway, that's that. I'm not sure if you remember this, but this is Dr. Douglas Brackman in Volume 6, who is the leading psychologist to some of the most successful and driven entrepreneurs, pro athletes, executives, and top performers on the planet.
Is we often don't feel the reward because we're on to the next thing and on to the next thing and on to the next thing. But as we drop out of that intense state of hyper-focus and you come back, there's an opportunity for driven people to really have a different way of being in the world. And I backed into this with guns and started to pair up. Longtime meditation practitioner, and meditation is very misunderstood. Most driven people hate it as it's taught, whether it's an app that you're supposed to listen to and watch, makes us want to break things, or closing your eyes if you're driven.
I don't know about you, but I never thought meditating could be any different than starting with finding a comfortable place and closing my eyes. Which brings me to my next guest. If you want different, Mark Fisher is different. I traveled back to the heart of New York City, took the lift up the building to Mark's apartment, which overlooks the city of New York in Manhattan. This entrepreneur/creator is so unique, but more importantly, Inc. 500 had his company on the fastest growing list in 2015. And that is no surprise. Because today we go inside the mind of a person that has taken their unique talents and gifts and has built a commercial structure around it, a very successful one. But before all that, what I really wanted to know from Mark was, when he goes to a family barbecue, what does he say when someone asks him what he does?
I usually will say, well, I do a couple of things. As usual, how I'll start. And then I'll tell them one of the main things that I do is I own two very unusual, eccentric fitness studios in New York City. And then usually they're like, oh, what does that mean? And then I'm like, well, now I feel like I'm like saying like a performer. Usually I hope I do this a little bit more, feels a little more organic, but we work with people that hate and or don't like gyms or working out. So because of that, and because I was a Broadway actor for many years, or not on Broadway, I say in the vicinity of Broadway, never on Broadway, I wanted to provide a high quality fitness service for people that don't identify as fitness people. So to that end, we don't call our members clients, we call them ninjas. And we don't use the term gym because that's not their bag. So we call our homes the enchanted ninja clubhouses of glory and dreams. And the mascot is the unicorn, and the space is very colorful, and it is a very unusual place. So we've seemed to found this particular niche in the city dealing with artsy people that know that they need to find a good fitness solution and just find that gyms make them feel crappy and sad and unhappy. And and I wanted them to have a happy place where they could have a relationship with their body and also do what the evidence, what science tells us are best practices for getting great long-term and short-term outcomes for their body.
Welcome back to Breakfast Television here on City TV. The trend continues in my 25-year broadcast career. Every single year I've had the chance to say, New Year, New You. It's what we do here on Breakfast Television. You know what? Simone Hodgkinson with us now, Heaven's Fitness. We've got some great demos coming up from Cindy and Brenda. Am I right with these names? Oh, perfect. We're going to focus on a couple of things here because we could talk all day.
We could.
Because this is it seems like every second person wants to get in shape or, keep that fitness up. You find you're so busy this time of the year, but I guess the key is not to just be busy for the first 10 days of 2019, but to stretch it out.
I'm Suzanne Cardenas with a look at the 2020 fitness trends and tips to make your workout stick. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
New year, new resolution, new gym. As I write all this with judgment, I have to add, I realized that on the 12th of December 2019, I joined a gym for the new year. What are you laughing at? Haven't you heard a hypocrite before? Interesting, isn't it? I bet I wouldn't have been able to be even aware of my hypocritical thoughts a few months ago. I suppose now is a good time to ask Mark, what is a question that we are not asking ourselves?
This is very bold, and I don't mean like drop this on there, but I think it's probably death. Like it's probably just like we're not cognizant of the fact that we are not long for this world, right? And I think most people, would be better if they had a more daily awareness that they are a ghost wearing a meat suit flying on a rock in outer space. Like we are meat bags full of holes that may or may not have a ghost. We might just be the meat bag. We don't even know, right? Depending on your spiritual beliefs. Like maybe it's just a bag of tubes with water and holes in it. And I have found that to be very useful and clarifying. And here's the thing that can go too far. So my challenge that I don't always nail is I am so gripped with awareness around it, it can lead to some really like not helpful thought patterns around like health stuff, around like anything that feels like I'm sick. Like, so that is an area I'm currently working on because it's really getting in my way. In some moments as I'm like getting a little bit older here, things are changing for me. But I think on balance, it has more worked for me than it's worked against me. And I think the question is probably something around like, how do I want to spend my wild and precious life?
You, as a listener of this show, I would imagine that you are an entrepreneur, creative, athlete, artist, performer of some sort. And this audio documentary is my team's way, as well as my way, of expressing myself. So, can we express more? Is our holding back affecting what kind of impact we can actually make?
The third piece I'm sort of playing with that framework is memento mori. It's like, know you're going to die. And I think that why that matters is because I think right now, and again, real-time framework, I'm thinking like the first piece, of course, is to know who you are, right? Know like what you want to do, know what principles of life matter to you, what's important to you, know who it is you feel called to serve, know why it is you want to serve that community or that type of person. be clear on what skills, what talents you have that you can uniquely leverage in the service of that individual. And then I think the other thing to be thoughtful about is the second piece is to know that like it will be a lonely road in some moments, that you're designed to look at the social environment around you and pick up cues that the, what is it saying? The tall poppy gets cut, like, just human nature. Like on the one hand, we all want to feel special, but the tension is we also don't want to feel like an outsider. And that is challenging because you can't, embrace what is unique about you without othering yourself to some extent. And I think that weirdly, when you look at the perspective of how deeply you want to serve people and how brief your time is on this planet, I suspect that there's nobody on their deathbed that ever is like feeling like, I wish I wouldn't have expressed so much of myself. I wish I wouldn't have been so forthright about who I am.
Which reminds me of UJ Ramdas in the previous volume.
So we've all had the experience of getting something external, right? Having it and feeling a little shitty. Like, fuck. Like, oh, I don't want that. It's almost like a mini depression, right? You're like, wow, okay. Like, I spent all this time, energy, effort getting this, buying it, owning it. And now I feel worse. This makes no sense. It does make sense because it's not what you actually fucking wanted in the first place. Versus like what you really, 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 really want is a very small, tight circle. And so identifying that from the get-go is going to be hugely fucking valuable.
Edward Deci and Richard Ryan identified the 3 basic needs that fuel intrinsic motivation. The first being competence, which is the ability to control the outcome of an activity and experience mastery of that task. Relatedness, the universal need to be connected to and experience caring for others. And autonomy, the desire to be an independent agent in your own life.
The really interesting thing about Mark Fisher is that he has intertwined psychology very deliberately into his business.
I'm a student of evolutionary psychology. And one thing that I think we know is that humans think a lot about reciprocity. So when someone gives us something, we feel like, oh, I feel indebted. I want to give that back. And of course, people that are less ethical can manipulate that system, but even ethical marketers should know that because it is a way to build relationships is, coming with a giving hand, adding value. And, I think one thing that's worked for me in business is when someone buys something that I made, I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot, I just feel so a desperate desire that I want them to have the best time possible. That's why everything is always 100% money back guarantee, because I want you to find the right thing and you trusted me. And even if it's not me, maybe I'm not the right person, but I'll help you find the right person. And then for me, I think having a team has been incredibly satisfying because in some ways it's that times 100-fold, right? Where, when you're an entrepreneur, and this, you share somebody your little dreams, little tender, fragile little baby bird, this vision of this thing. It might be stupid. You might not be able to do it. You can't guarantee it's going to happen, but you think it can. And then when people are like, yeah, okay, you weirdo. Yeah, sure. I'll do this weird thing. I'll light my life on fire. Particularly in the beginning of MFF where people really, did some wild things, really lit their life on fire in this weird idea that we had. And I think when I feel like I have achieved that promise for clients, or when I get a letter from, I'm crying. I'm very emotional about this, but from someone that has worked at Mark Fisher Fitness and I feel like I meaningfully impacted their life, it's what I most want to do. It's what I most want to do. So I think those are the moments that sit with me. And I have a feeling at the end of the whole game, they're going to be the ones I take with me.
So what are the moments you are going to take with you? While I let you contemplate that, I'm going to go back to Mark and dig deeper into his psychology fetish because you can see how much he loves this stuff.
I feel that I have leveraged some skills that I have. I do think that is true. And I think mindset is probably the biggest thing. And I was somebody that, it's interesting because again, my other caveat, my other bent that I want to disclose up front is because I do my best to think of myself as a scientist. When I look at things in the fitness space, there are a lot of things that are said by well-intentioned people that I don't think are reflective of what the literature suggests. So even when it comes to psychology and like what it means to live a good life, there is some data we can look at. Now, the caveat is when you look at social science literature, if you study my great passion life, I was so like honored and touched to be asked to talk about this is psychology. Because for me, I think it's the whole game, right? And I think if we study social science, if we study evolutionary psychology, if we study these predictable cognitive biases, we can get better at understanding the way our brains will often distort what reality is. I think we can get better at seeing what is actually true. And then once we know what reality is, we can make better and more impactful decisions to move towards whatever kind of outcome we want to have in our life, in our businesses, in the world at large. Now, in my 20s, I spent a lot of time actually reading a lot of self-help, a lot of stuff that probably falls in the category of new age stuff. I thought a lot of it was useful. In my mid-20s, actually, I was almost going back to school to get a graduate degree in comparative religion because I wanted to study to potentially become a psychologist. I wanted to get some sort of doctorate in social work. Wound up getting another production of Cats, the musical. I kid you not, that's what happened. I was like, well, I can't go back to school now. I'm going to get to do Cats again. But it's fair to say, even that time, I was like an amateur student of philosophy, an amateur student of religion. And then I think throughout my 20s, I got more and more interested in psychology. And then what's interesting, because when you get into business, there is a school of thought I find that is interesting, that like a lot of the best literature is sort of this like socially acceptable way for men in Western society to get to discuss spirituality. And that's like a weird comment, but I think a lot of the things that have spoken to me most, I think a great example is probably a lot of people listening to this have heard of the book E-Myth. If not, they want to get in the business. That's one I recommend. And for me, I think what was so useful about that was number one, it's if you're going to read like the first book when you're like, I think I might like to have a business. It'll save you a lot of grief if you start with that one. So I feel very lucky that I had some mentors recommend that to me early on.
When we come back.
So self-determination theory is one psychological framework that we've used at Mark Fisher Fitness. Autonomy often, unfortunately, can be thought to be the same thing as permissiveness, and that is like not true. One of the things that's challenging is whenever we do things, it's always multifactorial.
After the break, building a business as a true expression of yourself and how to use psychological frameworks to embed them into your business.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyofentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
Before the break.
The caveat is when you look at social science literature, if you study my great passion life, I was so like honored and touched to be asked to talk about this is psychology. I'm a student of evolutionary psychology. And one thing that I think we know is that humans think a lot about reciprocity. The third piece I'm sort of playing with that framework is memento mori. It's like, know you're going to die.
Now, the juicy parts. One of the greatest pleasures of my show is geeking out on the fundamentals of life, like confirmation bias, which, by the way, we all have. And if this is your first volume, I'll let Laura Peterson from volume 10 remind us about that concept because it is important before Mark goes into humans having 3 core needs.
So confirmation bias is we humans, all of us, not the left, not the right, not the females or the male, everybody, we tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe. This is proven with science. So My father is very conservative politically. And so if we watch the exact same news conference, he will say, did you see how XYZ reinforces what I already believe? And I myself am independent. I don't like either side, but I'm very much not extreme right. So I'll say, but what about ABC? I saw those things that reinforce my belief. And so we can literally have the exact same experience and take it completely different ways. And that's because of confirmation bias.
So self-determination theory is one psychological framework that we've used at Mark Fisher Fitness. And it basically posits that humans have three core human needs. And there are all sorts of different frameworks. I've read a lot of other ones, but the one we tend to go back to is this one, which it's social science literature. Is it empirical? Is it not? I'm not sure. But as far as like evidence for social science stuff goes, it's pretty strong. And the three core human needs are autonomy. We want to feel like we have some control. We want to feel like we're not having to do things. We have some agency. Number two, competency. We want to feel like we know what we're doing. We want to feel like we're progressing. And particularly, we fear looking stupid. And lastly, relatedness, with a very fancy academic term, which means for belonging. I want to be part of a community. I want the feeling of genuinely caring for someone else and a feeling that people care about me. And at Mark Fisher Fitness, I think because we had read a lot of books, So I think it wasn't like I would be lying to you if I said I was intentional from day one about like, oh, let's put these like things in. I was reading about this stuff. So I think, again, it sort of washed my brain, seeped in. And then after being around for a few years, because we attracted some attention and particularly some friends that like are in the hardcore psychology world are like, wait, what are you all doing? And it was really amazing because they came over and helped us reverse engineer how we were using some of these things, which seem to be best practices for behavior change, right?
That one thing about autonomy sounds super interesting. Tell me more. What does that look like in MFF land?
So the first one, autonomy, what that looks like in practice is looking for every opportunity to allow the individual to choose and take part in the process, whether that be an A/B close at the end of a sales process, whether that letting them choose which approach to nutrition they want to take, letting them, I think customer feedback actually is important culturally. One way that people have autonomy is if they give the business suggestions and the business takes action to close the loops. I think you're showing them you have agency. You have what you do, what you want can impact and affect the environment, right? I would also note another thing that two distinctions about autonomy that are important to understand. Autonomy often, unfortunately, can be thought to be the same thing as permissiveness, and that is like not true. So I often like joke like autonomy at MFF is not like, hey ninjas, there's weights over there. Go and do whatever you want. Go do your thing, right? Like that's actually like not helpful. You need to provide some guidance. So that I think is one distinction that is often missed about autonomy. And secondly, and I think actually a takeaway here is for people that manage people and hire people, in the beginning of the experience, because of their desire for competence, you want to not give them too much of a giant playground to play in because people want to get it right. So when you're onboarding a new team member or you're onboarding a new ninja, they have this other need of competence. They don't want to feel stupid. So in the beginning, you actually, I think, generally will be best being a little bit more directive and allowing them to slowly increase that playground, because if they've got too much freedom, too much autonomy, they can't find the walls, right? There's no tactile feedback. So that's autonomy. That's what that looks like in MFF land.
Everything we do or don't do comes from our motivations. Our motivations come from our previous experiences, our current environment, and most importantly, our internal perspective of the world. Well, maybe. That's my version at least. Mark?
One of the things that's challenging is whenever we do things, it's always multifactorial. There's always multiple motivations, and there are some motivations that are more or less useful, right? So if we get very nerdy and we look at behavior change psychology, these days we look at, and we won't go into nerdy detail about this, but there seem to be psychologists often break into 6 different strata of motivation. You move from a completely extrinsic to totally intrinsic. And what that means is sometimes we're doing stuff because we want other people to like us or give us things or whatever, or we're afraid of other people. And then sometimes we're doing stuff because we feel this is intrinsically we're doing it because we actually like it. Sometimes we do it because you're like, oh, well, I think I'm this kind of person. And I know that a person like me does this. So therefore, I'm going to do this thing. And I have a core desire to be consistent. And you're right. It really cuts both ways, because my desire to be a servant to people is also reflected in the fact that, like, yeah, I've definitely struggled with being a people pleaser. I struggled this day. If someone is upset with me about something or thinks like if somebody has like a bad experience, like at MFF, which, again, we served a lot of people, like, and we're not perfect. Like sometimes like we messed up a thing or the credit card went through or it's just not the right fit. It took me years for that not to ruin me for like a week. And it was a tough thing because I intellectually understand that's not helpful. It's not helpful to ruminate about this, but I would just get like in these spirals. And, I think the longer I've been at the game, I think the better I've gotten at being a little more stoic about that, about realizing sometimes it's going to happen. My business partner had worked the Four Seasons for many years. And like a certain point, I think like 3 years in, he was like, dude, I worked the Four Seasons. It's the greatest customer service hospitality brand maybe in the world. And all I did all day long was like apologize to people for stuff that got messed up. And I think, part of the issue there, the other thing showing up there is like a perfectionist desire, right? Which is interesting in my work. I feel like I've often been successful. I've often avoided the desire to be a perfectionist with my work, but with people, I really still struggle with it sometimes.
Data from the Cornell National Social Survey shows that out of 439 full-time employees that aren't self-employed, 42% withhold information when they have nothing to gain or something to lose. Furthermore, a quarter of the respondents withhold feedback that could help in areas of improvement.
So fascinating, right? But Mark, what about business strategies? Do you have any advice for us?
For example, the classic example would be like, let's say you're finding a problem in your business is you just aren't getting enough leads. And there are probably, there are a limitless number of ways you could look to grow a business. And I taught a course on this recently. So I sat down, I thought, and I know more service than I know product business. But with the service business, there's probably like 50 different buckets of things you can do. And then you could subdivide them into strategies that are predominantly about knowing you exist, awareness strategies. Then you have strategies that build your likability and credibility, some of which are also know strategies. But by the second exposure, it's not about knowing you exist because they know that. It's about, do I like you and will I trust you? And then you have a bucket of ones that are pay strategies, which of course can be the core service offering, but I would define them for marketing purposes as some sort of like either try before you buy, some sort of discount, free week, any possible thing it could be. And there are so many different things that you could do. And the thing is, if you get very tempted and freak out and you try to do 10 of them all at once and you're not tracking your numbers, you have absolutely no idea what's happening. On the other hand, you could be tracking your numbers, but if you do 10 things at once, it depends. Like you might find a way based on what your user experience is. You might be great at getting that data. It's always hard. We all want to ask like, how did you hear about Mark Fisher Fitness? And it's always like, they tell you Facebook. What they mean is my friends on Facebook. And what's like this personal conversation that nudged me. So that data is a little bit harder to find than it might seem. So ideally, we would want to be more scientists and run 1 to 2 to maybe 3 experiments at a time, hyper-focused for 4 to 13 weeks. And then diligently track those key performance indicators so we can see a connection. Now, we'll still want to ask that question too, because we'll hopefully get some more evidence that things that we know what is working is not working. But it's really kind of a real pickle, I think, to really get clear on what is moving the ball forward.
This next part is key. For me, for you, for everyone we care about. Before I dive into it though, I want to remind us about a couple of things. 1, everything that happens around us that we notice, feel, hear, watch is feedback. Remember confirmation bias? And 2, all that feedback is processed differently by different people depending on their internal perspective of the world. Does that make sense? Okay. Mark?
This is not a joke. In the beginning of Mark Fisher Fitness, my business partner would hide critical feedback about me because he knew I was fragile and I would shatter on the ground like a Fabergé egg on the sidewalk because I was just so fragile. And now I don't like it when someone says hateful things about me, but I think I'm a little bit better at like giving a little space and then also asking, okay, well, what is true about this, right? So one of my favorite books, if anyone finds an issue that I've now read 4 times, and we just had the whole team read it, is a book called Thanks for the Feedback. And the book is amazing because the point they make is there are a lot of books about giving feedback, but weirdly, we always think the problem is the person we're giving feedback to is not listening. And they're like, well, let's talk about how we receive feedback. And they really unpack all these things. So I have found getting to know my own tendencies has been very helpful. So I know that, for instance, when I hear something critical, the good news, the one good thing, well, I don't know if it's good or not, but one thing that's true, I rarely get like defensive and angry, but I will get so sad because I have such high standards and I feel so disappointed that I didn't meet this person's expectations, or I did something that frustrated them, or I didn't meet whatever their expectations were. And what I've learned to understand is that is okay. And also I should probably wait a hot second before making any decisions, because I think a challenge organizations can have, and MFF has been guilty of this, is I think until very recently, spent a lot of time solving problems that we didn't really have. Because we got one piece of feedback, and then I was like, oh no, this thing is going bad. And Seth Godin, the marketing expert, said the coolest thing I think I've ever heard about this is so cool. He said that it's easy to confuse volume and proximity for accuracy. It is easy to confuse the person at the front desk that is exploding and slamming their fist on the ground. They're right there and they're so loud with accuracy. It doesn't mean that person's perspective is true, right? So, because feedback is just data, right? And the more we can be, Charlie Munger always says, we have a moral obligation to be rational. The more we can think clearly and take in the data, but not be reactive, the better off we'll be. The flip side of that, this thing that can be scary, is sometimes you might have, let's say at MFF, we might have one ninja, and no one's going to do this at MFF. The ninjas are great. So if ninjas are listening, none of you are doing this, but they're slamming their fists on the ground. They're telling us what we could be doing better. But sometimes then you've got the same day 3 to 4 different ninjas that thoughtfully, kindly make a offhand comment about something that kind of weird is going on right now. And they maybe make it even to 2 or 3 different team members who don't think anything of it because they're not in their face. There's not volume. There's not proximity. They're not so close to you, but there is accuracy. So I think the other thing that is important skill to develop is creating, particularly in a business, systems to aggregate the feedback.
Feedback is important, and processing that feedback is even more important. And the next time you get feedback, I would like you to consider that there are always 2 elements to the feedback loop, because feedback is often like a story and you don't know what it means. So at MFF, a recurrent piece of feedback since 2012, I kid you not, has been the magic is gone. The magic is gone. I suspect it's because Mark's sitting on his throne of gold, counting his $100 bills, but the magic is gone and you have all betrayed all of us. I'm exaggerating. No one has said quite those words, but the phrase "the magic is gone" we'd hear a lot. And as you'd imagine, it bummed me out. It made me really sad. And the thing is, now I think I do a better job of, like, first of all, I let myself be a little sad because it would be weird if I didn't care. And then start to unpack, okay, well, what are the behaviors? What is making them feel like the magic is gone? Is it that, was the coach tired that day? Maybe they weren't speaking with their usual vocal energy and they weren't talking quite as much. Maybe somebody at the front desk seemed frazzled when they came in and came out. That's why whenever possible, as you can tell, it's stuff like I think a lot about. Anonymous feedback is great because you'll get stuff that's more candid you might not otherwise get. But if it's anonymous, the challenge is sometimes it's so general, I'm not sure what the behavior is. I'm not sure what to do about that. So yeah, those are, I think, hopefully some useful takeaway thoughts on the feedback stuff.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
There are high-performance athletes who have life or death situations they're in. We talked about, there's 3 real main traps that I see the real top performers. Yeah, one of the most common things I hear from the high performers I work with is this phrase: I don't feel lonely, but I feel very alone.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Mark because Mark Fisher Fitness, or MFF, is one of Men's Health's top 20 gyms in America. Mark and MFF have been featured in Forbes, the New York Times, the New York Post, the Huffington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, amongst others. He is an alumni speaker of TEDx Broadway. Mark is also a proud co-founder of the Uprising NYC, an innovative nonprofit devoted to empowering people to embrace their inner superhero. He has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Syracuse University, is a former professional actor, and has spent several years serving on the advisory board for New York City Center's Off Center. He is also a proud member of the Entrepreneurs Organization. He is an in-demand international speaker, consultant, and entrepreneur.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing and sound design by Kelly Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Voiceovers by Kelly Bonnyman. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Shannon Morrison. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com. Are you still listening? Here's a little gift to you for sticking around. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan identified the 3 basic needs that fuel intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation.
What are you laughing at? Haven't you... what are you laughing at? Haven't you ever heard a hypocrite before? What are you laughing at? Haven't you heard of a... What are you laughing at? Haven't you heard...
A quarter of the respondents withhold feedback that could help in areas of improvement. I'm going to say that one more time. Intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. Sorry, Thiago.